Hello, Richard Souter. Welcome to Radio Orbit. Thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. I've been wanting to for quite some time. I've been following your work for a number of years, and this was a great opportunity to get together and ask you a whole bunch of stuff that's been on my mind for a long time, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it myself.
Great. Richard, for the audience, where are you? I think you're in Texas. Where exactly?
South Central Texas. I'm down in San Antonio, which has been very hot this winter. Actually, it was in the 80s today, and I think it got up to about 86 or 87 yesterday.
Is that right?
Which even for down here in Texas is awfully hot in the wintertime.
Yeah, has it been like that the whole winter?
Yes, it's been very mild. We've had a fair number of days where it's been in the 80s, and even though we do have a subtropical climate in San Antonio, during the wintertime you don't expect a lot of 85-degree days, but we seem to have had them this year.
All right. Well, look, let's start things out with a little bit of background, both for myself and for the listeners. The work that you do is very interesting, and there's got to be an interesting story behind it, how you got involved in it. So why don't you give us a little background on who you are and where you come from and how you got involved in this work, okay?
Well, you know, I guess you could even say it started back when I was in elementary school, about 6 or 7 years old. I won a spelling bee. I think it was about in the first grade, if I remember correctly.
Uh-huh.
And the teacher gave me a little picture book on caves and spelunking.
Huh.
And man, did that fire a little 6-year-old's imagination. I paged that thing and looked at the pictures of these guys with miners' helmets with lights on them going to these passages underground, and it was fascinating. I, of course, outgrew the book as the years went by, and it wasn't until later, much later, when I had moved out to the Southwest to pursue my doctorate, that I heard people talking about alleged clandestine underground bases and secret tunnel systems through which I heard people alleging that purported little gray aliens and clandestine elements of the United States military were running tube shuttle trains back and forth between covert underground bases and installations and research facilities where they had all manner of strange programs going on, including biological and genetic engineering. And I didn't know what to make of these stories. It was the first time I'd heard them. Now, I think stories like that are more out there in the culture than they would have been 15 or 20 years ago.
I was going to ask you, Richard, give us a time frame of when you were getting the first earful of these sort of stories.
Well, that would have been back in the late 1980s.
Okay.
And it was pretty new for me. I moved over there from the East Coast, and I didn't know what to think of these stories, which I heard anecdotally and also read a little bit about in the journal, Sedona Journal of Emergence, which is published out of Sedona, Arizona, and it's still published now. I began reading it when I moved to the Southwest, and they had some channeled information in that magazine. Robert Shapiro and others channeling various sources that were coming through with this type of information, but I heard it independently from other sources that had nothing to do with the Sedona Journal of Emergence or their featured channelers. And so I was just bogged down with the very grueling doctoral program, and if any of your listeners have been through a doctoral program, you know what I'm talking about. It really puts you through your paces.
What was your doctoral study in?
Political science. I have a PhD in political science.
Okay.
The course load was pretty heavy, so I didn't have time really to pursue this question in the first couple of 3 years of my work. But after I finished my coursework and did my comprehensive exams and passed them, and had begun had my prospectus for my thesis accepted and I began researching and writing my thesis, I had more control over my schedule and was able to undertake this other research that I had really been itching to look into. So I did a little bit of a literature search, and I discovered, hey, there are underground bases. Most of the ones I found with my first shallow cut through the data were on the East Coast in the so-called Federal Arc, ARC. But clearly it's a pun, it's a play on words, and clearly it's a play on ARK, Noah's Ark. In this sense, the Federal Arc is a region basically in the mid-Atlantic region on the east coast of North America, within maybe no more than 300 miles of the Washington, D.C. area. And within this so-called Federal Arc, there's situated quite a number. To me, the number is unknown, but I believe it could easily be dozens, perhaps scores or more, of underground facilities of varying depths and sizes and degree of technological sophistication, but they are there, a fair number of them. And they are part of what's called COG, which is Continuity of Government Program. And this has been in place for years and years under both Democratic and Republican administrations or regimes or whatever words you want to use to refer to what we have in terms of governments in this country. And I suppose it could have had its genesis in the immediate post-World War II period when the executive office of the president, which is in popular parlance known as the White House basically, decided to establish through the so-called military office, which is part of the White House. It's an office that liaises between the Pentagon and the executive office of the president, but through or under the auspices of the military office in the White House. The government undertook to construct a series of scores of very deeply buried presidential command centers and bunkers and hideaways or bolt holes, whatever you want to call them, all around the country. Many of them were in the eastern part of the country, but not only. And a great deal of money was lavished on these in great secrecy. So this took place in the 50s and early 60s. I believe this type of activity is ongoing to the present day, funded to a much greater level and with a very high level of secrecy. That is the only thing I can conclude after more than 10 years of document research, archival research, talking to people, having people feed me tips and leads, receiving anonymous emails, letters, and personal conversations with a wide variety of people, most of them not in government, but a few who were, and some in the military, some out, etc. People from all walks of life, men and women, older people, younger people in their 20s and 30s, but many people have given me bits and pieces, dribs and drabs of information. You put it all together, along with the documentation I found, and I have no question. In fact, the evidence strongly indicates that there has been a massive, decades-long, ongoing underground excavation and construction program in this country carried out under great secrecy. Now, the COG program, Continuity of Government Program, is part and parcel of that. In my view, it's not all of it, but it is part of it. Now, who's in the continuity of government? Well, cabinet-level agencies, FEMA, and, of course, now FEMA has been folded into the new Department of Homeland Security. Yeah. So, really, and under Homeland Security, everything is secret. I don't know what fool would put in a Freedom of Information Act request to Homeland Security and expect to get a straight answer in George Bush's administration. I haven't even tried. But I don't doubt that much of this has just been folded under the purview and command and control of Homeland Security. Now, so I found out when I did my initial research about some things like, of course, the big FEMA base, which is large and pretty sophisticated and rather old now. It's about 50 years old now. It was made back in the 1950s. It's under Mount Weather in Northern Virginia, about an hour's drive or less west of the Washington, D.C. area in the Central Appalachians.
Hey, Richard, how deep, when you say that these, how deep are the deepest ones of these that we know about?
Oh, well, the ones on the open record, Mount Weather goes down hundreds of feet. Then there's Site R, which is part of the Fort Ritchie complex.
Oh, that's Ravens Rock up there in the northeast.
Yes, it's on the border, in the border area between Maryland and Pennsylvania. That'd go down hundreds of feet. Then you have the NORAD facility under Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, and that is, given that there's quite a large mountain over top of it, I think parts of it go down something like 1,500 feet.
Wow.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it goes even deeper. And so those are some of the publicly known ones. Then you have the ones like in the Monsanto base, which initially was under control, I believe, of the Air Force and the Atomic Energy Commission, built back in the late 40s and early 50s. This is just southeast of Albuquerque, about 5 or 10 miles, on the far eastern fringe of Kirtland Air Force Base, the Kirtland Air Force Base Sandia National Labs Complex, which is southeast of Albuquerque, New Mexico. That was built in the late 40s, early 50s, still in use. I think the Department of Energy now uses that facility in part for storage of low-grade nuclear waste. But that one, from documentation I've obtained, goes down hundreds of feet. I suspect it may have deeper levels that aren't publicly known, but the parts that are publicly known, I think, go down at least 500 or 600 feet. So at the minimum, the ones that can be gotten at through public documentation go down easily 500, 600 feet or 1,000 feet or more. And then you have facilities such as the DOE waste isolation pilot plant, which is near Carlsbad in New Mexico, and which is something like 2,100 feet underground. And that's way down there. That complex spreads out over about 1 square mile.
Wow.
Well, that's nothing. That's well within the state of the art.
Yeah, well, that was another question. Is that, like, square footage? How big? You mentioned this big FEMA facility. Like, give us an idea of how big that might be.
I can't give you the square footage off the top of my head. I don't know I've ever seen a square footage figure, but it can accommodate, when it's buttoned up and sealed off in a crisis situation. I believe it can accommodate several hundred people, upwards of 2,000.
Wow.
In other words, it would be like a small town underground.
Right.
With streets, its own power generation, its own telephone exchange, supercomputers, 2 reservoirs, actually small ponds or lakes underground that you can paddle around in rowboats. They actually have rowboats down there.
No kidding.
Yes. Well, of course, if you have these ponds, you have to go in and service them. You'll have intake pipes and so forth, and you need to row out there to get to the things. Then they'll have commissaries, living areas, recreational facilities, work areas. In other words, pretty large and deep. And mind you, that's circa 1950s technology and size.
Amazing.
So my guess is if that was what was state-of-the-art 50 years ago, and that state-of-the-art today, and it was very highly secret 50 years ago. Today, of course, it's more or less common knowledge, which means that, to my mind, and that of most other informed observers, of course, Mount Weather would be straight in the crosshairs of the Chinese or the Russians. And that of most other informed observers, of course, Mount Weather would be straight in the crosshairs of the Chinese or the Russians or whoever the Pentagon might get into a shooting nuclear war with. And certainly a facility like the Monsanto facility at Kirtland, the NORAD facility at Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, Raven Rock, Mount Weather, all the known underground facilities would have multi-megaton warheads coming in on them, multiple multi-megaton warheads coming in on them. I talked with a guy who was in Air Force intelligence, and he said that after the fall of communism in the late 1980s, that in the East German archives, the United States Air Force discovered that Cheyenne Mountain was targeted by the Kremlin for something like 10 or 20 H-bombs that would come in at like 5 or 10 minute intervals, one after another, multi-megaton warheads, and the mountain would have been reduced to radioactive gravel.
My gosh.
So you might say, well, we're 1,500 feet underground. You might take one hit, you might take two, but you're not going to take 10, 20 megaton hits, one after the other in a 2-hour period.
That literally just destroy the entire mountain, in other words. Just one.
Well, not only that, they would approximately vaporize half of Colorado in the process.
Right. I mean, it just melts everything and sucks every bit of oxygen.
Well, and you would have this vast radioactive dust cloud, and, of course, they would do that with every sensitive target. The Pentagon has a deeply buried command center beneath it as well. I've been told of at least 6 levels. I would guess it goes much deeper than that.
Sure.
And, of course, the one under the White House, you would assume the White House would have at least 2 or 3 multi-megaton warheads coming in on it, because it also has a very deep underground facility. In my first book, I actually spoke with someone who's been down in the bunker under the White House, and this person went there under very, I would even say, highly unusual circumstances, and to this day, my source does not have any clue as to why she went there. But she did, nonetheless.
Richard,
yes.
Let's give out the website again real fast, and I want to mention that first book that you're going to talk about here. My guest tonight is Richard Sauder, and information about him and his work can be found at sauderzone.com, SAUDERZONE.com. And this first book that we're going to talk about a little bit is called
Underground Bases and Tunnels,
right.
What is the Government Trying to Hide? And it's been out about 11 years now, but still selling well and finding new readers. It truthfully has turned into an underground bestseller, pun completely intended, much to my total surprise. I was a person who never set out to write a book. In fact, I was sitting in a coffee shop in L.A. Back in the summer of, well, it wasn't, I guess it was like the fall of 1992, something like that, or 93, somewhere along through there. And I had found some documents. I was at a very early stage in my research, not envisioning at all that I was going to write a book or books, as I've written 3 now, and I'm working on a 4th one. But I had no concept, no idea, no inkling I was going to write a book. And I was sitting there talking to a couple of guys. We had some interest in common, and I'm not from L.A., but I happened to be out there. And so we were sitting around, and it was in the morning, maybe about 9 or 9:30, and I was showing them these documents, and one of them, who was in a very interesting professional position, albeit not working for the government, said, "Richard, I think you have a book here. I think you should write a book based on these documents," because I kept finding more and more.
Right.
And I said, "Well, that's flattering, but I don't think so." So I left L.A. a couple of days later and took my documents back home with me and put it out of my mind. I wasn't going to write a book. I just dismissed the thought and didn't even reflect on it whatsoever at all for weeks, until one day I was sitting there in front of the computer and it hit me like a thunderbolt. I am going to write a book. I just flipped 180 degrees within the span of 2 or 3 seconds.
Why?
I don't know why to this day. I don't know why. Because I just can't answer why. I went from absolutely no, categorically, emphatically no. I, Richard Sauter, will not write a book. I'm not going to write a book, and it's just not going to happen.
Right.
And I flipped 180 degrees within 2 seconds, after weeks. And it just came to me out of the blue. And I began to write that same day. And in a sense, I haven't stopped researching and writing since. Now, getting back to this visit beneath the White House, as I go along through the years, I keep finding out more and more until I've reached a point where I realize there's just a lot underground. A lot. And the people who put it there and who run operations and programs and projects down there, and who have, Mike, they've got workforces down there. People are working down there, unbeknownst to us. Although now, I'm starting to know that, see? And so are you, and so are people listening to the program. You know, you go through life, you go through school, elementary school, high school. A lot of people go away to college or to a university somewhere, maybe even get a graduate degree or 2 or 3, as I have. And you get propagandized.
Yeah.
You get told what to think, how to think about it, what not to think about, what to say, what not to say, and how to say it, how to express yourself, how not to express yourself, when to talk, when to shut TF up.
Yeah, you got it, Richard. There's no doubt about it.
We are taught how to be good little biological robots. And I just described hundreds of millions of people. And I'm in the process of unlearning that biological robot stuff and learning how to be a self-directing human being and a self-actualizing human being and a human being who can think and analyze things independently of having to seek a slave master or puppet master to do it for me. And I encourage you, and I think you're already headed down that same direction yourself, but I encourage those who are listening who may never have thought of it in just this way to begin thinking of life and our situation in it in just this way, and determining how they also may become a free person as opposed to a puppet or slave. Now, mentally and physically.
Hear, hear, Richard, hear, hear.
Now, so getting back to what's under D.C., I now understand that there's a beehive under Washington, D.C. Beehive, a multi-level beehive going down at a bare minimum 100 or 200 feet, and I strongly suspect it goes down at least 1,000 or 2,000 feet, and perhaps, in fact, some of the documentation I've got going back to the Kennedy administration talks about going down 3,500 feet and making tunnels and things down there.
Wow.
And that was 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago.
All right. Well, look, we're at the bottom of the hour here, okay? So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and let's talk a little bit about this. It sounds like a great amount of this activity began in or around the years surrounding World War II, or just after World War II. Maybe we can talk about the origins of some of this stuff, and then I'd also like to talk about the technology that's involved in making them, because as you're talking about these things that are 50 years old that are outrageous, and we have to imagine the technology has advanced dramatically in the last 50 years. So what are they capable of now?
Let's do it.
Yeah, those are questions I'll have for you in just a few minutes. So let's come on back in just a minute. Everybody, my guest is Richard Sauter one more time. Hey, Richard, is that 800 number the correct one that's on the website there?
I think so.
Okay,
that's not for me. That's for Adventures Unlimited Press in Illinois. And by the way, they may not have an operator. I don't know if they have an operator there 24 hours, but you can leave your contact information if you call and no one's there. And the really cool thing is, if you buy one of my books, they'll send you a free catalog, which is a $3.95 value in and of itself. They actually sell the catalog on newsstands, and every half year, because I'm one of their authors, they send me a couple of their catalogs. And Mike, I spend half an hour just reading through my own publisher's catalog because it's so fascinating.
Well, I tell you what, there's just an absolute outpouring right now of fascinating information coming from all kinds of different areas, and I just think it's amazing.
Yes.
All right, well, look, that number is 1-800-718-4514, and like Richard says, if there's not an operator on line, just leave him a message with the information, and you can also always get back to it at Richard's website at www.souderzone.com. And I'll have Richard's information, of course, up on my website as well from here on out. So we'll be back in just a moment with Richard Souder, and in the meantime, we will play a piece of music here. This is Martin Lind. The song is called Night Owl, and he goes by the name of Basic. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with Richard Souder. This is Mike Hagan. You're listening to Radio Orbit.
Period. And having developed atomic weaponry, the Americans and everyone else, but especially the Americans, realized we'd better go underground, because if we have this stuff, it's only a matter of time before others, like the Russians and the Chinese and others, also develop this type of weaponry. And by the way, these weapons make a big bang, and you don't want to be anywhere near it when it goes off, so we'll go underground to protect their critical infrastructure and personnel. And so that was part of it.
Right, you got the EMP issue, too.
The EMP issue is part of it as well, the electromagnetic pulse issue, and the radioactive issue, as well as the shock wave and the blast effects, which are stupendous, stupendously damaging and harmful. So there was that, you had that as a motivation to go underground. But then there were other factors as well. Just the sheer, for purposes of compartmentalization and carrying out any type of black project or clandestine program, whether it involved hard engineering, basic scientific research, political projects and programs, espionage operations, whatever. If it was carried out underground, hundreds or even thousands of feet underground, the physical security would be unparalleled, because you could very rigidly and strictly control access through multiple bank vault-style access doors with tumbler locks to which only a few or a handful of people would have access, and so you could absolutely control entree. And it appears that that's precisely what has happened. And that is the situation where we are now. You don't get in unless you are an insider, and if you have to ask what's going on, you're not. So you and I are not insiders, and those who are on the inside are not saying very much. It's an indication to me as to the scale and scope of the underground, and as I've lately discovered in recent years, the undersea aspect of these clandestine projects, that we have such a vast amount of paper and documentation that has slipped through the cracks. This has been a joint effort on the part of major corporations and also smaller corporations, government agencies, large and small, well-known and not so well-known, and also other organizations, non-governmental and non-military. It's not only the military involved underground. There are non-military agencies and organizations underground, and also, my research is now strongly indicating, undersea, as well as non-governmental. When you're in that realm, there are many secrets, and it's amazing to me, as many people as have come forward to speak to me, I've been surprised at the number of people that have come forward to speak to me. It's indicative, I think, of number one, that there is a lot going on down there, and number two, at least some of those who have some knowledge, whether direct or indirect, of what's happening, have to feel uncomfortable about either things they personally have seen or had to do, or seen others do, or know about, that they will leak after a fashion, albeit none of them directly. To people like me, I'm not the only one, but I'm certainly one of them that have been a beneficiary of this type of information. And it's this whole impetus actually goes back, I believe, thousands, even tens of thousands of years. I believe there have been previous cycles of so-called high civilization on this planet. That would be human civilizations with high technology, or some type of machine technology, and capable of doing civil engineering on an impressive scale. I don't think we're the first. We may not even be the best, not by a long shot. We're just the latest, in my view, in a long line. But in terms of our more recent history on this planet, I think starting in World War II, because the onslaught as the Third Reich, as a tide of war turned against the Axis in the Third Reich in 42, 43, and it became clear that they were in danger of losing the war, they began to move a lot of their sensitive operations, industrial and otherwise, underground. And the Germans went underground in a big way in the last few years of World War II.
Right.
Actually, they started to go underground even before the outbreak of World War II. They went even more underground during the course of the war. And there was an organization that was in charge of that is roughly analogous to in the American, the contemporary American military structure to the Army Corps of Engineers. And that organization under the Third Reich was called Organization Todt, T-O-D-T. It was named after Fritz Todt, who was the father of the Autobahn, which was, for its time, a very advanced highway system, and the highway system on which most modern expressways are based, including the American interstate highway system, was, after a move of 2 or 3 decades, in the post-World War II period, the Americans made essentially an Autobahn system here in North America, only we called it the interstate highway system. But Fritz Todt was the first to introduce this kind of highway system to the world, and it was built in Germany in the pre-World War II period. So he was a well-known and accomplished civil engineer, and was tapped by Hitler when war broke out to take charge of Organization Todt, which carried out a lot of the vital civil engineering projects for the Nazis during the war. And now Fritz Todt, however, died during the course of the war in a plane crash in 1942, and ultimately one of his subordinates, named Xaver Dorsch, took over. At first he was answering to Albert Speer, who was his commanding officer, but towards the last couple of years of the war, Adolf Hitler decided to remove him from the command of Speer, and he answered directly to Hitler toward war's end. And Hitler tasked Dorsch, among other things, but he specifically tasked him with the construction of a number of immense, deeply buried industrial production facilities. Of course, the Nazis lost the war in 1945, and so all of this came to a halt, I think. See, I don't absolutely know, and neither do you, because at war's end, the Americans and the French and the English, but especially the Americans and the Russians, came swarming into the German-controlled areas of Europe and into Germany proper, and just snatched up everything they could find in the way of hardware, any type of technology that worked, blueprints, drawings, designs. They kidnapped, arrested, did whatever they had to do to put their hands on all the engineers and scientists they could. And the Russians bundled as many as they could back to Russia. The Americans bundled as many as they could back to the United States under Operation Paperclip.
Right, well documented.
Very well documented. Now, under Operation Paperclip, the Americans also, and by the way, before I leave that immediate post-war period, I want to say that we truly don't know to this day what the Nazis, everything the Nazis were working on, because there's still a lot that's classified from the World War II period and the post-World War II period. I mean, from the entire early late 40s, there's still classified information, and we don't know everything the Americans and the Russians and others found when they went into Germany and into the areas of Europe controlled by the Nazis. We just don't. We know some things. We don't know all the technology that was obtained, whether actual working hardware or hardware that was being designed or theoretical work. We just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and the odds are that we know less than we don't know.
I don't even know how to quantify that, but I don't have any doubt that there's quite a bit that hasn't been revealed to this day. I just don't doubt it whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that one of the people that the Army Air Force at that time specifically requested under Operation Paperclip was Salvador to be brought to the United States under the auspices of Operation Paperclip. And not only him, but some of the other civil engineers, or as the Paperclip documents I've seen call them, technicians, to work on what was called the American military's underground plant program. This is circa 1947, June of 1947. So already then, they had what they referred to as an underground plant program in the works, and wanted to bring over the Nazis' best civil engineers, the guys who were building the top-of-the-line stuff at the height of the war. They wanted them to come here, and essentially, I mean, you don't really even have to read between the lines. Essentially, they wanted the Nazis to come over here and do for Truman and the Pentagon what they had done for Hitler and the Third Reich. It's bad if you do it for Hitler and the Third Reich. It's good if you do it for Truman and the Pentagon. And so it happened.
Oh, yeah.
We did have a massive program of underground construction, and my research indicates it continues.
All right, so we've got about 10 minutes before the top of the hour. Let's talk a little bit about technology. How do they build them?
All kinds of ways. Now, the tried and true method is with so-called drill and blast. This is well-proven technology that's been used for decades in hard rock mining, where you essentially use drilling rigs, and you drill boreholes, fill the boreholes with explosives, and put fuses in the explosives, fire in the hole. You explode the explosives, it shatters the rock. You bring in machinery, you carry away the rock, and there you have it. You excavate tunnels like that, or chambers, large caverns, whatever you need. That's one way you can do it. And then you can reinforce the walls and the ceilings of such tunnels or chambers by putting what they call roof bolts or rock bolts in them, which are essentially huge steel screws or rods that you screw several feet into the rock, and then bolt that down real tightly, and it helps stabilize the rock and keep it from slabbing off or shifting. And then you can also, and they frequently do, use something called gunite, which is a type of fast-setting concrete And so you can also make a nice concrete cover over the bare rock, and that helps stabilize it too. So that's one way you can do it. And now another way of making tunnels is to come in with a variety of tunnel boring machines. One of the kinds that's most wide use is the mechanical tunnel boring machine, which has a circular boring face. And I have pictures of some of these in my books, in my first book and also in my third book. They can be quite large. They can be hundreds of feet long with all of their trailing apparatus. I'm not exaggerating. Hundreds of feet long.
Well, hey, I'm
and the actual cutting face can be anywhere from 6 or 8 feet in diameter up to. I've seen citations for tunnel boring machines as great as 55 feet in diameter.
Wow.
But it's for tunnel boring machines as great as 55 feet in diameter.
Wow.
But it's quite common to have them in the 15 to, say, 20-foot diameter range. Those are very common. You would almost say a dime a dozen. But they can be even larger, 30, 40, 45 feet in diameter, which is humongous. And the power of these machines is enormous. Think of a huge, enormously powerful electromechanical earthworm, if you will, boring its way, chewing its way through the solid rock, hundreds of feet, even 1,000, 2,000 feet underground. And that's how these things work.
Richard, this picture that I'm looking at right now is on your website. It's the Air Force Tunneler.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that one. I mean, this is an astonishing picture right here.
Yeah, well, it means that the military has at least one tunnel boring machine because I have a photograph of it. I got that from the Department of Energy. I wrote to their Las Vegas office and made a request for that photo. I had found a citation for it somewhere else, and so I specifically requested it when I wrote to them, and they sent me that. They sent me that photo. It's a great one.
It is amazing.
And that I think was from 1981 or thereabouts. And what was going on at that time, if you recall, that was the beginning of the first Ronald Reagan administration.
That's right.
And the MX missile was being developed then, and they, meaning the Pentagon, were tossing around different basing schemes. One that they were considering was to make a hundreds of miles long network of deeply buried underground tunnels somewhere in the western United States. And the idea would be that you would keep the missiles down in this labyrinth of hundreds of miles of tunnels buried a couple thousand feet down. And you would shuttle the missiles through these tunnels, and in the event of a real live shooting nuclear war, you would hitch a missile behind a tunnel boring machine, and the tunnel boring machine would bore out from almost a half a mile underground out of the side of a cliff or a mountain somewhere, and set up this missile and fire it off in retaliation.
Huh. So it's a way to hide missiles from being destroyed from a launch. Huh.
Yes. So that was the idea, and they were doing some test tunneling there at the nuclear test site in Nevada, and this was one of the machines they were using. Now,
amazing. I mean, and this machine is at least 25 years old. As you say, this photo's from December '82, and they had to make it at least. I mean, the technology obviously involved in that machine has to be 30, 40 years old.
Yeah. These machines are in use all over the world, not only by the military, but by all kinds of governmental and non-governmental organizations and agencies for making everything, whether it's tunnels for secret use by the military or whether it's water tunnels for municipal water supply departments or sewage outfall tunnels. There's quite a number of them that have been made around the world, including in the United States, or for subway tunnels or railroad tunnels or highway tunnels. I mean, there's a lot of these machines, and they're in use in countries all over the world, not only in the United States, but really they're quite common nowadays, and it's a well understood and developed technology. It's a proven means and method of making tunnels, and by God, they do.
All right, look, I've got two questions for you. The first one is, I've heard rumors or stories about a tunneling machine that's nuclear in nature or atomic in nature. It sort of melts its way through or something. Mm-hmm. And also, I have a question about how much do we know about tunnel systems that have been built to connect existing caverns? In other words, it seems like it would make sense to me, rather than blow out a big giant cave, to go try to find some caverns that are natural and then just try to network between those. Is that something that you know anything about?
Well, the first question having to do with the so-called nuclear-powered tunnelers that nuclear subterranes is what they're called in the literature, mm-hmm. that would melt their way through the subsurface rock and create a vitreous tunnel lining because of the heat provided by a nuclear power plant or power core, that a miniature nuclear reactor, that they would actually vitrify the rock and make an obsidian-like, very, very powerfully strong obsidian-like tunnel lining that would also be waterproof. And I've heard rumors about these. The closest I can come to documenting them is research and design work that was done at the Los Alamos National Laboratories in northern New Mexico back in the mid to late 1970s. And there actually were at least 3 patents taken out for tunnel boring machines using nuclear power that would create tunnels similar to what I've just described. Now, whether any of these machines have been built and are in secret use, I do not know. I can tell you that the scientists and engineers who did this work at Los Alamos National Labs patented this technology in 1979 or thereabouts.
Amazing.
If it is in use, it's been done secretly, because I have combed through the open civil engineering literature, and to this date, I have not found any open reference to such machinery being used. I don't rule out that it may be in use covertly or clandestinely in black or compartmentalized operations by the military-industrial espionage complex. I can't say that that's the case, but I don't rule out the possibility.
Okay.
Now, the second question as to whether the military-industrial espionage network has made use of already existing underground caverns. I suspect they have. But again, I can't prove that. It would make sense, certainly, if you had a large underground cavern to make use of what already exists. It'd be more cost-effective than having to build it yourself. And my guess would be that some of that has happened. It's well known, for example, that the Appalachian region has naturally occurring fairly large limestone caverns. Some of them are open to the public. I'm sure there are others that are not open to the public, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of them have been modified for use by not only the military but other agencies or organizations. And it would also not surprise me if some of them may not have been also connected by clandestine tunnels with other facilities. Of course, if there are clandestine tunnels, by the very nature of their being clandestine, you're not going to document that. It will remain in the realm of hearsay because I don't have any security clearances. I've been not privy to any compartmentalized information. I don't have any classified documents. No one has passed me any classified documents. If they did, I'd put them up on my website. I'd also pass them to about 30 other websites within a 24-hour period, and they'd be all over the Internet. but I don't have any such documents. I do have some declassified or unclassified documents, but that's about it. Now, as for clandestine tunnels, though, I've heard many stories about them. The technology certainly exists to make them. The black budget is monstrously huge. My best information shows the black budget running into the trillions of dollars. Trillions, with a T.
Wow. All right. Well, look, Richard, top of the hour again here, and let's come back and we'll talk a little bit more about maybe usages. In other words, why. We'll go a little bit deeper into why they're putting so much effort into this type of development, and also let's try to move forward to the present day about what we think is happening today. Okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Back in just a few minutes. My guest is Dr. Richard Sauder. You can find information about Richard at www.sauderzone.com. That's SAUDERZONE.com. You can also link there directly from MikeHagan.com, and we'll have this interview with Richard archived up on the web in just 24 hours or so. In the meantime, we will play a little bit of music here from my friend Enrique Palmgren from Norway. His musical project goes by the name of Leak. We'll be featuring him for the entire program with Michael Tsarion. In the meantime, this is a song called Surplus. It's from his album Indigo Child. Check this one out. This is Mike. You listen to Radio Orbit. It's 1 o'clock, and we'll be back in just a minute with my guest, Richard Sauder. So I'm going to mention them both to you here, and you can address them as you see fit, okay?
Yes.
The first one has to do with Denver International Airport. And this is one that I'm very curious about, too, because I used to live in Denver, and I've been there. I've seen some very strange things there. There were all kinds of strange stories around town when the place was being built, and all kinds of funny money involved. And anyway, so that's one. And the other question, and as I say, you can take these one at a time, but I just want to get them both down here, has to do with Site R. And, well, he asked, is there a connection between underground facilities and the long line facilities? Does that make any sense to you, long line?
Well, let's take the second question first.
Okay.
The long line facilities, I don't know what the long line facilities are. If the person who asked that question could clarify the question, I would appreciate it. Maybe they have some information and knowledge that I don't. And if they are able to enlighten us, I would greatly appreciate it. In the event they mean if they're asking whether Site R is connected by tunnel to other facilities, I can say that that is compartmentalized information. I can't tell you with certainty that it is or is not. However, I can tell you that I have my mother lives in that part of the country, a very, very close by, north of Gettysburg, which is not far from Site R. It's less than 50 miles. And in that part of the country, meaning in south central Pennsylvania and northern Maryland, it's part of local law that there are tunnels underground that connect those sensitive facilities, such as Camp David, which is in the mountains of northern Maryland,
right,
and Site R, which is not far from Camp David. It's only about 10 or 15 miles from Camp David, and Fort Ritchie, which is not far from there either. And then FEMA has their National Fire Training Center between Site R and Camp David, and then also in Frederick, which is literally only miles from Camp David as well. The United States Army has their very sensitive biowarfare research facility. So you have all of those sensitive facilities very close together. And Fort Detrick is the Army facility in Frederick. My guess would be all of them are connected by tunnel. Can I tell you that for sure? No, that'd be my best guess.
Okay.
And it is part of local law that there are tunnels in that region and that the bigwigs come up in the tunnels in their black limousines from Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
Bigwigs being, president, vice president, cabinet officers, cabinet secretaries, admirals and generals. That's what I mean by big shots.
Okay.
My guess would be that there's some truth to those stories. Those types of tunnels that are part of local lore would be consistent with tunnels that would have been made in the 1950s and 1960s, in my view. My guess is that the more recent stuff would probably use high-speed tube shuttle trains.
Amazing. Yeah. All right, and look, this guy, he's on the ball because he replied, and he says long lines refer to AT&T long line microwave tower,
okay.
Radio, coaxial cable, and fiber optic networks.
I know what he's talking about. AT&T in the Cold War period had microwave relay facilities all over the country, and the military made wide use of this, and other parts of the American government as part of their secure emergency communication system. And many of these AT&T facilities have an underground component, and in many cases that went down multiple levels underground.
Okay.
While I don't work in any of these AT&T facilities, and ostensibly this type of facility has been consigned to the technological ash heap because of the advent of fiber optic cable communications and satellite communications. In actuality, I believe that some of these facilities are still active, but they've just been downmoded, so to speak, perhaps just to deflect idle curiosity, among other things.
Okay.
But yeah, I suspect that some of these, not all of them, but I suspect that some of the AT&T facilities, underground facilities, may have been networked in with tunnels to some of these other facilities. That would not surprise me. Now, remind me of the first question. It slipped my mind.
DIA.
The whole Denver question is very fascinating, and I will say, first of all, that there definitely are underground facilities in the Denver area. First of all, Lockheed Martin have a couple of large facilities in the Front Range to the west and southwest of the Denver metropolitan area. Actually, they are on the fringes of the Denver metropolitan area, right up against the mountains. I have not gone in those facilities, but I've been to the front gates of both of them. And my best guess, based on all of my research, is that there are underground facilities at both of those Lockheed plants. And that there probably, again, this would be my best guess, is some type of tunnel system running up and down the Front Range of the Rockies, probably connecting the Lockheed Martin facilities, the Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs, Cheyenne Mountain. Also, I would expect to be connected to that the Federal Center, which is not in Denver. It's west of Denver. If you go, are you familiar with the Denver metro area?
Yeah, I lived there for 15 years.
Okay. Well, if you go out west, between Alameda and 6th Avenues, you go out west several miles. Just before you get to the Front Range, you run into what's called the Denver Federal Center. It's been there for years. It's still there now. Yeah. And there is an underground facility at the Denver Federal Center. It's been there for many years. And it's part of the COG, Continuity of Government program. And it's I suppose at one time was run by FEMA. Now, I guess, as I alluded at the outset of the program, it's been folded into or under the Department of Homeland Security. I haven't been there in a few years, several years, but it is there, and it's an active underground facility. In terms of airports with underground facilities, I think, is it Stapleton Airport, the old airport in Denver?
That's the one that Denver International replaced, yeah.
Yes. Well, I suspect Stapleton has an underground facility beneath it. Can I prove that? No. That is my strong suspicion, based on what I've read and heard and been told. Now, so there are known underground facilities in the Denver area, most especially the Denver Federal Center. Now, as regards the Denver International Airport, I've visited it twice, gone all through, taken a tour, a guided tour with one of the administrators of the airport, a very high-level administrator.
Really?
Gave me a personal tour of the airport.
Interesting.
Yes.
That must have been something else.
Yes, took about an hour of her time at my request.
Wow.
And her answers satisfied some of the questions I had, but raised yet new ones in their place. There are known underground tunnels at the Denver airport. There's the tunnel that you ride when you go out to the concourses,
right,
in the main terminal.
Right.
It's a wonderful train. I love it, with the propellers on the wall.
Right.
All of that. It's very futuristic, and so there's that tunnel. There are also other tunnels for the baggage trains, which also go to and from the concourses, from the main terminal. And there are, of course, underground areas and tunnels for utilities, for water, heat, electricity, fuel, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So yes, there is an underground infrastructure at the Denver International Airport, part of which the public can go into and must go into in order to use the airport for its intended function, which is to board and airplanes and fly here and there.
Right.
And then there are parts of underground infrastructure the public does not go into, but which airport employees and maintenance personnel do. Now, there are many lurid tales out on the Internet and here and there that you will read and see and hear about even deeper, more esoteric and evil and dark levels where all manner of strange and weird and illegal and bizarre things are going on. Do those still more deep and secret levels exist at the Denver International Airport? I do not know. I personally have not seen hard proof that they do. I have read many a rant on the Internet alleging that these places exist. I have never seen hard proof that they do.
I agree with you.
It's easy to stand up and say, or even better with the relative anonymity of the Internet, swear up and down on the proverbial stack of Bibles that, yeah, there's, all kinds of weird stuff underground at the Denver International Airport. But I haven't seen any hard proof. Could it be there? Sure.
Right.
Does the technology exist to do that? Yes. But is it there? I don't know.
Okay.
That's the best I can say now. Is there Masonic symbolism in the Denver International Airport? You bet.
Oh, heck yeah.
Starting with the Masonic cornerstone, or actually not exactly a cornerstone, but it is a Masonic stone of sorts in the front of the airport, and I've seen that. But you know what? The Masons have been putting stones in buildings for
forever.
Centuries.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
When a new building is made, a new skyscraper, a big new public building, you know what? The Masons have a way of being there and putting a stone somewhere or a memorial, or it's like dogs going down the sidewalk and urinating on everything they come to. It's like the Masons. You build it, the Masons will come and put their little thing saying, hey, we were here. Why do they do this? I don't know, but they do.
All right.
And they did it at the Denver airport.
That's true. I've seen that little that little memorial.
And it even says something about the New World
Airport Commission.
What does that mean? I don't know. We're living in a strange world.
No doubt. Definitely questions still. All right. Well, look. Let's get back to the stuff that we do know about. Okay. Let's talk more about the bases that we know about, or at least the ones that we're relatively sure about, and what we think is going on now in some of these, and why it's such a big deal. Because obviously we only know the tip of the iceberg. If it's as compartmentalized and as deeply secretive as you suggest that it is, So that means it's probably much bigger, right?
Here's what I've been able to glean from talking to people, and I would give you better than 50% odds, which is the best I can do, not being part of a compartmentalized program. But from my position on the outside looking in, I would say that some of the more unusual things going on in these compartmentalized programs, we can assume that there will be the more or less routine command, control, and communication of the military-industrial espionage complex. In other words, they'll have their secure high-speed computing and communication systems underground.
Okay.
That's been down there for decades. It still is. So you'll have that at places like SITAR and NORAD and the FEMA bases and what have you.
Right.
But beyond that, which we already know is there from movies and from general reading in the newspaper, it seems that there probably is back engineering or reverse engineering of captured UFO-type technology.
Really?
I'd give you better than 50% odds that that's going on. Secretive biological, genetic engineering, cloning engineering programs and projects.
Yeah, certainly that wouldn't surprise me.
I would give you better than 50% odds of that. Mind control research programs and projects underground.
Certainly that wouldn't surprise me.
I would give you better than 50% odds of that. Mind control research programs and projects underground, using both purely mental technologies and also electronic and psychotronic technologies.
And this is something you've written about as well.
Yes, no doubt in my mind that this is going on. And why would you carry out programs like this underground? Well, for purposes of secrecy. Out of sight, out of mind. Except in the case of mind control programs, it's the case of out of sight, in mind. Scary, but true.
My gosh.
In whose mind, you might ask rhetorically? Why, in your mind, of course. And the more stealthily and secretively, the better, because how better to control someone's mind than to have them thinking thoughts that they assume are their own, because they discover them in their mind. And of course, if it's in your mind, and you find a thought in your mind and it's your mind, it must be your thought. But if we live in a world of mind control, then no, not at all. Just because you could discover a thought in your mind doesn't mean that it was generated there or that you're the author or creator of it. It may have been put there for you to discover, and you, upon discovering it, assume, because it's my mind and the thought is in there, that it's my thought. Oh, no. Not necessarily true at all.
Wow, now that's a creepy technology.
Well, but welcome to 2006.
Wow.
And what this means is we, all of us, need to develop a very high level of discernment. What was it the ancient sages said? Know yourself.
Know thyself.
How can you know anything unless you first know what it is that's knowing, which is yourself? If you don't even know yourself, how can you know anything else?
Right, and how will you know when a thought arises that's not your own? Yeah.
You can't otherwise. Now, it's very easy to say. It is the hardest person in the world to get to know? It's yourself. The hardest of all. And so many, I've begun to realize that there are just millions of biological robots walking around. The average human being is a biological robot. Not really autonomously self-directed. Very much taking cues from others, very much other-directed. Not self-directed at all. In fact, the average person has not the faintest clue how to come up with an original thought of their own, on their own initiative, and then having had said thought to put it into action and actually begin to construct an individual life trajectory based on their own independent, autonomously directed thought process. The average person has not the first idea as to how to go about that. So the first reality is to realize the vast majority of human beings, the vast majority, are biological robots. They're on autopilot, just reflexively reacting to life. And once you have that realization, you have to honestly say, well, you know, maybe I'm one of those. And that's the beginning of your self-liberation. And you know what? There's only one person that can free you on the face of the planet, and that's you yourself. You have to take your own shackles off. You have to free your own mind and free your own body.
I agree with you, Richard. But I think that it's helpful to have people that can help you recognize that there are shackles there. That's one of the great deceptions.
It took me years to realize that for myself.
Right. And
years.
Yeah, and myself as well. And I think everybody has that sort of a story, people that consider themselves to be at least in the waking state or beginning to awake.
I am at some stage in the early waking process.
I would agree. And
I'm in an early stage. And that's the astonishing thing. I'm 51 years old. I'm only now beginning to awaken. I'm only now beginning to realize that I've been so very fast asleep almost my entire life. And most people have not yet reached this point.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And so we, as a species, have huge problems.